Let's come back from the break, please. We have reached the 5 o'clock public comment period. And public comment, just a few things about public comment. It is limited to 5 minutes. It is taken under oath, as with all comment and testimony in this hearing, and it is accepted through audio, not video. I will call you in the following order. Adrienne Sandoval, Anna Hansen, Linda Birchfield, Karen Adams, and Anthony Cook. In the event there is someone on the platform who did not reach out by email earlier, I am still happy to take your comment. Please reach out in the chat. If you struggle with the chat function, please call or text Pam Jones at 505-660-4305, and we'll get you on the list. So, Ms. Sandoval, Director Sandoval, I am unmuting you. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, your voice is coming through loud and clear. If you would please spell your first name. Sandoval is the common spelling, but spell your first name.
It's Adrienne, A-D-R-I-E-N-N-E.
Thank you. And if you'd raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you, Ms. Worth. My name is Adrienne Sandoval. I'm the Director of the Oil Conservation Division within the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. The Environment Department and the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department have been working together since early 2019 to develop complementary strategies to reduce waste and air pollution from New Mexico's oil and gas industry. These strategies are designed to meet the state's climate targets, improve air quality, and reduce methane waste by ensuring saleable resources are captured, which increases royalties and revenues to the state. The agencies set out to draft separate but complementary and non-mutually exclusive rules consistent with the distinct statutory responsibilities. IMNRD's rules address natural gas waste, while NMED's rules address air pollution. The agencies worked together for nearly 2 years, and during that time jointly held multiple meetings with a diverse group of stakeholders, convened the Methane Advisory Panel to create a comprehensive technical support document, and met frequently to discuss stakeholder input and rule development. This approach enabled the agencies to develop rules that are not duplicative, do not conflict, and do not leave regulatory gaps. The two sets of rules are designed to work together to provide full coverage of the industry to achieve the climate targets New Mexicans deserve. IMNRD's rules went before the Oil Conservation Commission in January and were approved by the Commission in March. They subsequently went into effect on May 25th. IMNRD's rules require that the upstream and midstream operators achieve a 98% gas capture target by the end of 2026. These high-level requirements will dovetail well with the Environment Department's proposed rules, putting the state on a path to achieving its climate goals while also achieving meaningful waste and emissions reductions. The Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department support the proposed rules before the Environmental Improvement Board and encourages the board to adopt these rules. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Director Sandoval. It sounded like you were reading from a written statement. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to send that to Pam Jones or to me so that we can share it with the court reporter.
Yes, I can send that to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me call then on Commissioner Hansen. Commissioner Hansen, I'm unmuting you. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right, I will start your 5 minutes now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Santa Fe County Commissioner Anna Hansen. Thank you to the Environmental Improvement Board for the opportunity to comment. As a local elected official, it is my job to make my community a safer and healthier place for my constituents. One of the ways we can do that is by regulating harmful pollutants from oil and gas sector. The EIB should finalize the strongest possible rules to curb methane and other industry emissions to ensure all New Mexicans can breathe clean air. Santa Fe County has supported stronger methane capture rules since with Resolution 2015-51 and Resolution 2018-28. And as a strong advocate for human survival on the planet, I strongly advocate to cut greenhouse gases. We need strong rules. And on that point, I would like to comment on how improvements could be made to the rule. Protection for frontline communities is critically important that the leak inspection program for proposed NMED in July be adopted, and that the final rule is strengthened to protect frontline communities, requiring more frequent inspection to find and fix leaks. Also, completions. The final rule must strengthen to ensure New Mexico incorporates leading approach to address pollution during well completions. It should require operators to capture or combust emissions during completion, including the initial flowback stage, as the state of Colorado now requires. And with pneumatics, the final rule should strengthen pollution cutting measures on pneumatic controllers, and the second largest source of oil and gas methane pollution in New Mexico. NMED should require companies to inspect gas-powered pneumatics for malfunction and leaks, as well as accelerate the timeline for operators to retrofit equipment with zero bleed and zero emissions. Reducing methane waste and pollution is a key step in Governor Lujan Grisham's strategy to address air pollution and climate impact caused by the oil and gas facilities. And the governor has committed to enact nation-leading methane emission rules. The proposed NMED rules will complement rules finalized by the New Mexico Oil Conservation Commission, OCC, in March 2021 that bans the practice of routine venting and flaring at new and existing wells across the state. Rural communities, tribal communities, children, and the elderly are especially at risk. It is an environmental justice issue. A recent analysis made it clear that tribal communities often suffer from disproportionately high pollution levels. New Mexico is home to the two energy producing regions that are among the nation's most polluted counties: Eddy, Lee, San Juan, Rio Arriba, and Chavez counties, the 5 New Mexico counties, home to 97% of the state's oil and gas wells, are all at risk of violating federal ozone standards of 70 parts per billion. In closing, we need to create the strongest rules on ozone and be a leader for the rest of the nation. We must support the rules NMED has proposed and make them stronger. I am grateful for the opportunity to comment. Thank you for your service to our community, and I look forward to seeing strong rules being passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hansen. Let me look for Linda Birchfield. I think I saw her earlier on the platform. There you are, Miss Birchfield. I am unmuting you. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Speak a little bit louder.
Okay.
If you would spell your last name, please.
Okay, it's Burchfiel.
Thank you. And raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Okay. To begin, I want to thank the EIB for this opportunity to comment. The Environment Department's proposed rule to limit ozone precursors is strong, but it does need to be strengthened in 3 areas in order to protect New Mexicans. First, the rule needs to be adjusted to improve the air that New Mexicans who live near oil and gas production breathe. The American Lung Association gave an F grade for ozone to our top oil and gas producing counties, Leah, Eddy, and San Juan, in its 2021 State of the Air report. Neither I nor my family lives within a half mile of wells, but over 100,000 New Mexicans do, and they have suffered lung problems for too long. The health of those families is as important as that of your family. Production wells located there will need inspections and leak repair more often than once a year to ensure that they are not leaking ozone precursors. The second adjustment is to extend the rule to capture or combust emissions during completions of oil or gas wells, including during the initial flowback stage, as well as during redevelopment of an existing well. Finally, the Environment Department should strengthen this rule to cut pollution from pneumatic controllers. Companies should inspect pneumatics for malfunctions and leaks and accelerate the timeline to retrofit equipment with zero bleed or zero emission pneumatic controls. In addition to these three adjustments, I want to urge the Environment Department to stick to their requirement for annual inspections, even for those wells with low production and assumed low potential to emit. While industry argues that their potential for damage is minimal, these low emitting wells together produce more than 60% of air pollutants, according to John Goldstein of the Environmental Defense Fund. These proposed regulations are a good start, and I urge you to strengthen them by requiring more frequent inspections for wells located near homes, and by extending the rule to include completions and redevelopment, as well as pneumatic controllers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Birchfield. Let me move now to Karen Adams. There you are, Ms. Adams. I've unmuted you. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you for taking my little talk today.
Yes.
I do
Hold
appreciate
on.
your time.
Yes. Your last name is Adams?
That is correct.
All right. Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Okay. I certainly understand the logic behind the petition for the regulatory change regarding the gas and oil sector. The most important job I have right now is being a grandmother to 3 grandchildren who attend the APS schools. And I know that the gas and oil industry provides, in just Bernalillo County alone, over $400 million to these schools. And the education of our children is already lagging on a national level. And I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by limiting the monetary resources we gain from this industry. This industry, it becomes unpopular for really unknown reasons. And I'm not sure that all of the science is there to support the complaints. I think we can be a leader in this industry. I think they're always working to make it more secure and more safe. But we need to provide for our children. We need jobs in our state. And we are, unfortunately, a very poor state. So if this is something that we can continue to improve on, I think we should limit the amount of regulations that are put on this industry. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adams. All right, let's go to Anthony Cook. Mr. Cook, I am unmuting you.
Hello.
Hello. If you would please, standard spelling on first and last name, and would you raise your right hand?
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right, I'm starting your 5 minutes now.
Okay. So I'm actually currently I live in Roswell, so right outside the Permian Basin. And I'm a teacher now, but I used to work for Department of Health for about 5 years as a health educator and also as a nutritionist. And I grew up in Carlsbad, so I've grown up there my whole life, been around the whole area, and it's definitely transformed a lot since I've grown up there. Um, I mean, at nighttime, if you just drive outside the city, it's glowing from all the flaring that's going on there. And so it's a huge difference than when I was a kid, where you would go out, it's pitch black, you could see the Milky Way just 20 minutes outside of town, and now that's not really possible. Although that's just light pollution, that's one of the many pollutions or problems that we have. But I do feel like we need stronger regulations on emissions and and emission standards, and also on who's regulating what's going on. To me, the way I see it is most of the industry is self-regulated. If they spill, they report their spill. They report when they clean it up. They write the report, submit it to Santa Fe or NMED, wherever that office may be at, and somebody just rubber stamps it. Nobody actually goes out in the field and says, oh, this company cleaned up their own spill, right? And the way I see it is like, that would be like me self-reporting my electric bill or my water bill every month. And if they said I went over a certain kilowatt usage or so many gallons of water, then I would be fined. Well, then I would never go over, right? Because I don't want to be fined. So that's kind of one way I see it. Another thing too is that we are also the cheapest state to drill in, and we have the least amount of regulation when it comes to drilling, and our bond price is also the lowest. I know someone mentioned that we need to reduce regulation, but by increasing regulation and increasing bond prices, we therefore increase the amount of jobs and revenue that we get from oil and gas industry. Right now, the bond price for like well areas is like $20,000, and they can drill multiple wells on those sites, and each well to remediate them could be anywhere from 40 to 80 or $120,000. So whatever that $20,000 bond didn't cover, we, the taxpayers, then have to fit the bill. So although some people may see it as detrimental to the industry, they actually enjoy drilling here because it's the cheapest place. With that also being said, the environment department doesn't really have any staff to regulate what's going on. So although we say all these things on paper, I would like to see something happen with actual jobs being put in place where people want to work and live in those areas. Because the cost of living is so high in Eddy County and Lee County, most of the environment department jobs do not cover the cost of living in those places. So most of those workers don't want to work for the environment department. They'd rather work for the oil and gas industry where they're going to get paid a fair wage. So there's multiple factors involved in this besides just a piece of paper saying we should increase regulation. We've also got to have the boots on the ground to do it. Another thing that's very upsetting with this bill is that when they went from state to state, I mean, not state to state, but city to city, especially in the Permian and the San Juan Basin, their big push was public health and protection of public health. Yet there has been zero collaboration with New Mexico Department of Health or other health agencies or entities. And New Mexico Environment Department hasn't done anything to actively address public health issues. When the Permian Basin or the Southeast region has the highest cases of asthma, ER visits for asthma for children and adults. And this was before massive drilling and increased drilling operations and fracking in the Southeast region. So they knew that there were health disparities in our region, and then they released more volatile organic compounds and things like that into the air to pollute the air more and increase and exacerbate these problems. So there's also these health impacts that also have to be addressed and studied, and there should be something where people can go and get help for being exposed to toxic substances, volatile organic compounds, and things of that nature, especially produced water. Another thing is that produced water can also produce polyfluoroalkylic substances, which are considered forever substances that never go away. If anybody would like to do research, you could look at Clovis Air, the the military base in Clovis, the Air Force over there did a lot of testing with a fire retardant chemical that has the PFAS chemical or the forever chemicals. And now there's tons of ranchers and farmers whose livelihoods and water is polluted. So they can't drink the water, they can't use the livestock, they can't do everything because it's polluted with a cancerous substance.
Mr.
This same substance
I'm
is
sorry.
in,
Mr. Cook,
yes,
your 5 minutes is approaching. Would you wrap up?
okay,
Please?
yes. So this same substance, this forever chemical, it has also been proven to be present in produced water, which is actually radioactive waste, and has tons of toxic chemicals and substances in it, which often gets poured on the ground or isn't correctly disposed of in our region and could contaminate our water table. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. All right, no one has reached out in the chat, so I believe I've come to the end of public comment for today. There are more than 24 other opportunities for public comment at 9, 1, and 5 each subsequent day of the hearing. Thank you all. We'll return at this point to the technical case. When we broke, we had heard from Mr. Davis, and I think if we just have Mr. Davis's questioning, then we can end for the day. That's all right with everyone. Ms. Katz, do you have questions of Mr. Davis? And can we get Mr. Davis back on the screen? There you are.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just have a couple, hopefully, really quick questions. So I know that you have, Mr. Davis, thank you for your testimony. I know you've said this in so many words, but I just want to get you to say it one more time. So IPA&M did not actually suggest any alternative approaches to the revenue or employee thresholds in the definition, correct? You just want it removed and to go back to the pre-petition draft stripper well exemptions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And would you agree that there are potential to emit thresholds that are included throughout the rule and the various provisions addressing specific equipment and processes that would give relief to lower emitting facilities?
I do. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we originally proposed deleting or removing that provision. I would say with the exception of pneumatics as well, and the liquid transfer. Originally, there was no applicability threshold for liquid transfer requirements, and all wells are subject to the pneumatics provision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davis. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fox, do you have questions of Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I do. Hello, Mr. Davis. My name is Tanis Fox, and I represent 9 organizations in this proceeding that we collectively refer to as Clean Air Advocates. Mr. Davis, you submitted direct testimony in this proceeding, correct, on behalf of the independents?
That is correct.
And with that direct testimony, you all filed Exhibit 1, which is your proposed modifications to NMED's proposed rule. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And within that Exhibit 1, within your proposed modifications, you did not propose any amendments to the small business facility definition, correct?
That is correct.
And then you filed rebuttal testimony in this proceeding, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then with that rebuttal testimony, the independents did not file any additional proposed amendments with that rebuttal testimony, correct?
That's correct.
And are you familiar with the EIB's rule at 20.1.302A5, which says, you may not be familiar with that citation, but are you familiar with the board's requirement that requires in any notice of intent, if a party wants to propose recommended modifications to a rule, that the party include that language for recommended modifications within the notice of intent?
Are you asking whether I was aware of that?
Yes, are you familiar with that rule of the boards?
Yes.
In your rebuttal testimony, you mentioned the definition of small business under New Mexico statute, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Which is 50 or employees or less, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the independents have not provided any economic analysis, have you, on the impact of NMED's proposed rule on oil and gas operations with 50 employees or less? Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you haven't proposed to the board any modification to the small business facility definition that would include that state definition of small business, correct?
Correct.
Then also in your rebuttal testimony, you mentioned the former stripper well exemption that had appeared in a draft of NMED's proposed rule in 2020. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In your rebuttal testimony, you don't supply any analysis or data or financial analysis for the board of the impact of NMED's proposed rule on stripper wells, do you?
No.
And nor do you propose any modified language to the small business facility definition that would include stripper wells, correct?
Correct.
Then in your rebuttal testimony, you mentioned the low PTE exemption that had been in this previous draft of NMED's proposed rule, correct?
Correct.
And you at all don't provide to the board any analysis or data or economic analysis of the impact of NMED's rule on, you just call them low emitting facilities, have you?
No, ma'am.
And you haven't proposed any modified language to the small business facility for the board to consider that would include low emitting facilities, correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Ms. Paranos, do you have questions of Mr.
No
Davis?
questions. No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right, thank you. Mr. James?
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you, and I think that was you, Mr. Johnson, right?
Yes, ma'am. I think I'm speaking on behalf of Mr. Janes.
Right, I just wanted the transcript to be clear.
Okay, thank you.
I don't believe Ms. DeVore is with us. Mr. Nykiel?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeSalen?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heiser?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Janot said he has no questions. Mr. Boutier?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gutierrez?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Colclisher?
No questions, thank you.
All right, and Ms. Witherspoon? She may have departed. All right, I'm going to turn now to the board members for their questions. In the event you are an attendee with a question, please reach out through the chat and we'll follow up on it. Madam Chair, do you have questions of Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just have a couple, just for clarification in my head here. Mr. Davis, sorry, I don't see him on this. There he is. Okay. You had mentioned mentioned the regulations in Colorado and Pennsylvania or Pennsylvania as having separate regs for conventional versus unconventional. And I understand from Ms. Fox's examination and questioning that there was no additional language proposed. Is that correct? Just so I have it right in my head. Related to related to your statement that these two states had different regs where they separated conventional versus unconventional. Is that correct?
That's correct. Regarding the small business provision, we did provide some language that was similar to the Colorado approach in pneumatics, which we'll get to later, but not regarding the small business.
Okay, and thank you for that clarification. And in that discussion you had earlier, you had talked about, the difference between a conventional and unconventional well. I think Mr. Rose asked for additional explanation for all of us in the board. By chance, do you have a percentage in New Mexico what the breakdown is between conventional and unconventional?
I don't off the top of my head. I would say the majority of the wells classified as stripper wells would fall into the legacy or conventional side of things, but I don't know the exact number of what's unconventional in the state.
Okay, thank you for that. And one more question regarding that, even though I know there was no additional language proposed, but I just want to have it correct in my head. So with unconventional wells versus conventional wells, along the line of why other states have different, separate regulations that separate the two, do you see any additional emissions coming from conventional wells, or what's the difference between maybe potential emissions from both types of wells?
So it varies from well to well, but I would say in general, most of your conventional or stripper type wells are going to be operated at lower pressures, so and lower throughput to the tank. So I think it's safe to assume that the emissions from those wells would be less than those of the higher producing, higher pressure type wells.
Okay, so just again, just so I have it. So you're saying that those conventional wells probably emit less?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis, do you have questions of Mr. Davis?
I do. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for your testimony. I have to agree with you on the point, listening to your testimony, that I would think that Marion Oil and Gas would be a small business based on your explanation of them. So I do find that point kind of interesting. And I wanted to kind of flesh out your statements about the well by well examination when you're looking at cost per well for implementation of the rule. And it seems as we've gone through this day and a lot of the testimony that there's a perception that there's a big pot of money as far as profit, and then that profit can easily be distributed back to the wells evenly for implementation of the rule. Is that the way you understand it's being presented? Because that's the way I'm understanding it.
Yeah, I would say that's my perception of the discussions that have taken place, and that's one thing that I was trying to illustrate there. That is not the way that we do business. We run economics on individual wells, and so that well's future revenue or cash flow needs to support the expenditure that we're going to make. If not, then we would plug and abandon and reclaim the site. If the future revenue doesn't justify the investment on that asset.
So if an individual well cannot support the cost of the rule implementation, then it's likely that you'll just plug and abandon it.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's where you were making the statement, and I have so many notes here, I don't seem to see it, but I think you were making a statement along the lines of early abandonment of some of these wells. So that's where you were getting that from.
Yes, ma'am. A lot of these stripper wells or legacy type producers are at the end of their decline, so they're relatively flat. There's quite a bit of reserves to be recovered over, you know, many years. And so I was referring to the premature abandonment of those. There's still recoverable reserves associated with those wells. But in an instance where the cost of compliance overburdens those wells, we would prematurely plug and abandon and leave that resource in the ground.
Do you think that stripper wells are worth operating if they're towards the end of their life?
There are many companies that, you know, they have a business around operating stripper wells. You know, they're sometimes intermixed with the term marginal wells. So their margin is much lower, but smaller companies with lower overhead are able to continue to operate those and be profitable at doing so. It's just the margins associated with that are lower.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's insightful. And I did note that you didn't, or I'm sorry, IPNM did not submit a proposal for the language change to this portion of the rule, but you did mention Colorado and Pennsylvania's kind of take on this portion of it. And maybe you can't answer this question, but if you all had made a recommendation, is there one of those states or a combination of those that you would have recommended?
Yeah, it's kind of a long answer, but I would say I like Pennsylvania's approach in where they separate the two, you know, the conventional versus unconventional. Colorado tends to have more of a provision-specific relief in terms of low producers. And that is something that we proposed in pneumatics, was following a similar approach that Colorado had in terms of providing relief for folks that operate low producing wells. And our original approach was supporting NMOGA's position in striking the small business provision and definition because we didn't feel like it provided the necessary relief.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Davis. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Member Cates, do you have questions?
No questions here. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer, do you have questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
Yes, I just have a couple of questions. You mentioned that you wanted the exception put back in for stripper wells. Do you have a ballpark figure of what percentage of the wells in New Mexico are stripper wells, would be classified as stripper wells?
I've looked at that in the past. I believe by well count, there's 31,000 stripper wells, and 39 non-stripper, or sorry, that's a percentage, a little over 19,000 non-stripper wells, and that's 61% and 39%.
And then one other question is, I believe in Ms. Keene's testimony, she mentioned that the small business exemptions would be about 15% of the total number of companies which represents about 82 companies. That would be with the 10 employees limit. So it sounds like you all are suggesting 50 employees be the limit instead of 10. And do you know how many more companies would be included in that exemption? Do you have an idea if it were 50?
I do not. That was one part of the analysis that I was unable to follow from the department's standpoint. And that's one of the reasons that I just made the general reference to the Small Business Relief Act. Because I wasn't sure how they determined the 10 employee cutoff. And so I do not know what that would look like if you raised it to 50.
Very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Member Honker, do you have questions of Mr. Davis?
Member Garcia asked my question, so I have no questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Madam Chair, we're coming back to you.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just had one follow-up question to Vice Chair's line of questioning. So can you just remind me why IPA&M did not propose the additional language that for related to either the Colorado or the Pennsylvania regarding small business and the separation between conventional and unconventional?
So I think it would be difficult in this context to separate the two, in just in the way that this regulation is set up. And we felt like the original pre-proposal language or structure accomplished that same goal in terms of moving, back to a wells production or potential to emit. We had engaged with the department and they had indicated they wanted some feedback, but it seemed to be within the context of their structure, which we found just very difficult to be able to provide any feedback there to make that workable. So that's one of the reasons that we did not provide proposed changes there.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rose?
I have no questions of this witness, Madam Hearing Officer. That completes our testimony, and I assume he can be excused until the next time he has to testify.
Yeah.
Which hopefully will be sometime this week, but we'll see.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis, for your testimony. And thank you, Mr. Rose. So let's see, I did note that Mr. Hernandez actually joined us. I hadn't, wanted to necessarily go to another witness unless the board and court reporter were willing. Mr. Johnson, could you tell us whether maybe Mr. Hernandez's presentation would be a lengthy one?
Madam Hearing Officer, sorry, we still have Sir rebuttal from Ms. Day and Mr. Palmer and Ms. Keene.
I'm very sorry. We did need to loop back to Ms. Day ASAP.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, and sorry to Mr. Hernandez if he had hoped to speak today. Ms. Katz.
Thank you. The department calls back Susan Day, Brian Palmer, and Elizabeth Bisbee Keene. So I'll start with Ms. Day, who's being quite the trooper. Ms. Day, can you summarize the issues raised in the direct testimony and rebuttal on the small business definition from the other parties?
Yes, in their direct testimony, both NMOGA and IPA&M proposed to remove section 20.2.50.125 in its entirety. And both parties stated that they were unaware of any companies in New Mexico that would meet the thresholds in the definition of small business facility in section 20.2.50.7. IPA&M also stated its preference that NMED reinstate the exemptions for low producing and low PTE facilities as proposed in the pre-petition draft rule that NMED released for public input in July of 2020. In their rebuttal, IPA&M recognizes the department's efforts to provide appropriate relief for small businesses and prevent the premature abandonment of marginal wells. They also acknowledge that the small business definition may provide relief, but only for very small operators. They're concerned that an operator could find itself qualifying as a small business one year and not the next due to the uncertainty in commodity prices. Additionally, they state that the NMED analysis for the small business facility threshold only considered operators with wells that overall, on average, could not support the cost of compliance. Finally, they restate their preference that NMED reinstate the exemptions for low producing and low PTE facilities as proposed in the pre-petition draft rule that NMED released for public input in July 2020. On page 4 of his rebuttal, Ryan Davis of IPA&M says that well production and PTE are better measures to assure the necessary relief, but does not recommend specific limits. And in response to that, I'd just like to point out that the rule has PTE limits for many of the sections, and those limits in some cases were revised based on industry testimony. I'd also point out that no production limits were recommended by APA&M or NMOGA. On page 6 of his rebuttal, Ryan Davis appears to be recommending that the board consider a small business definition of 50 or less employees based on the New Mexico statutes, excuse me, that he cites in his testimony. Specifically, definition E reads, small business means a business entity, including its affiliates, that is independently owned and operated and employs 50 or fewer full-time employees. We did an analysis of the 50 employee or less definition and found that 324 of the global ultimate parent companies that had revenue, employment, and well production data in our analysis, of those 274 global ultimate parents, or 85%, would have less than 50 employees. And this 85% of global ultimate parent companies is associated with about 19,000 wells, or about 40% of the wells in the analysis, and represents $4.7 billion in oil and gas value, or about 28% of the value of the wells in the analysis. And this is really the same unacceptable impact as the stripper well exemption.
Thank you. And Ms. Day, what is your response to IPA&M's concerns that operators could move in and out of qualifying as a small business from one year to the next due to uncertainty in commodity prices?
In the context of this rulemaking, it's appropriate to take a snapshot of the industry to profile the affected universe. There are always going to be economic fluctuations. Not even considering commodity prices, production can also be variable. Moreover, for federal rulemakings, it's standard practice to pick a snapshot of conditions in the regulated industry or industries when estimating compliance costs and small business impacts.
Thank you. Ms. Keene, are there examples of statutes and regulations that use small business definitions based on revenue and employment?
As I discussed in my previous testimony, both the Clean Air Act and New Mexico's construction permit fee regulation do contain definitions of small business, and both definitions contain an employee threshold and an air pollutant threshold to qualify. These definitions are used in compliance assistance and a reduction in the permit fees.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Palmer, can you respond to Mr. Davis's testimony that NMED's proposed thresholds for small business facilities did not account for the cost of pneumatics?
Yes, Mr. Davis is correct that those costs were not included in the estimated cost per operator in the example facility that Ms. Keene described earlier. If you look at the data that are included in exhibit, NMED's exhibit 095, which is our pneumatics cost spreadsheet, you can look at that in the Permian Basin on a per well basis. The annual cost would be about $460 at a site with electricity or $850 at a site without electricity. In the San Juan Basin, the cost per well would be about $2,300 at a site with electricity. And the annual cost at a well per well at a site without electricity would be about $4,200. And we'll get into those costs, I'm sure, a lot more when we talk about the pneumatics section of the rule. But that's just an order of magnitude, just give the board some sense of what those costs would be.
And so did you do any estimates with those costs?
Yeah, it would change the cost of the example facility on average by about $2,000 per facility. So probably from about $38,000 per facility to probably about $42,000 per facility.
Okay. And how many companies would that estimated change affect with of the revenues?
I think it would move the number of facilities on that revenue threshold analysis by only 2 or 3 facilities based on the data that we have in the spreadsheet.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Katz, Mr. Palmer, Ms. Keene, Ms. Day. Ms. Fox, do you have questions of this panel?
No, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Ms. Paranos?
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
No questions from CCP and NAVA EP, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. And that was Professor Pasiniak. All right, thank you. I don't believe we have Ms. DeBoer with us. Mr. Nykiel?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeSalen? He may have stepped away. Mr. Heiser?
No questions, but with thanks to our London correspondent for staying up through this.
Yes. Mr. Rose?
No questions, but I'll engage Mr. Palmer perhaps later on pneumatics, or at least later this week, hopefully not later today. So
All right.
I think he was correct that that's where that debate will happen.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jano said he didn't have any questions. Mr. Boutier?
Madam Hearing Officer, the only question I have is for you, which is, are we going to hear from Smitherman on this subject or no?
Mr. Heiser?
I would be, given the late hour, I'd be happy to chat with my client and see if we have anything to say about it. And then maybe we just touch on it tomorrow. It's very brief.
All right. Let me finish with the round of questioners here. Ms. Gutierrez?
No questions.
Thank you. Let's see, Mr. Paul Fleischer?
No questions, thank you.
And Ms. Witherspoon? No? All right, I'm going to turn to the board. In the event you are an attendee and have a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair, do you have questions of this panel?
I have no questions at this time. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis, any questions?
I have a couple of questions, and I apologize if I'm asking the same thing. I realize that at this time in the day, my brain and all these numbers flying across are starting to mash. So the 50 employees per, or we were talking about the small business cutoff, 50 employees versus 10 employees. I think this question is for Ms. Day. Is that 50, when you applied the constraint of 50 employees, was that 50 employees and a $250,000 revenue, or was that 50 employees and based on an average revenue, what a company with 50 employees would make?
I was just looking at the revenue data reported in Dun & Bradstreet for the global ultimate parents in the analysis that actually had revenue, employment, and well production data. So it's just those qualifying global ultimate parents arrayed by their employment data and then counting the number that have 50 or fewer employees.
Okay, and I think you said the number didn't change drastically from 10 to 50 employees, and how many businesses were able to qualify?
Say that. I believe that there was, that Mr. Palmer might have been talking about there being not much difference when he included the cost of pneumatics.
Okay, so maybe that's a better question. Does the number of qualifying businesses change drastically when you look at 10 versus 50?
The number of global ultimate parents that are less than 10, have less than 10 employees, 10 or less employees, is just one part of the small business facility definition. It also has that 250,000 revenue threshold. So that the number that has been raised by Ms. Keene includes both those pieces. The number that I talked about was not looking at a revenue threshold in addition to an employment threshold.
Okay, okay, thank you for clarifying that. And kind of switching subjects a little, or subjects a little bit here, but Mr. Palmer, I think you said that the cost per well was up to $4,400 per well for implementation. Did I get that correct?
That is the average cost to retrofit pneumatics per well in the San Juan Basin at a site without electricity.
Okay. I have to admit, given my experience, that number seems kind of low. So I'm just curious what that includes. Is that just parts and installation, mileage?
Let me clarify. That is the annualized cost. So that's not the total cost. That is just the annualized cost.
Okay, could you explain that a little further?
The annualized versus the total cost?
Yeah. We went back and forth on this, you know.
I know. It's like, yes, when we talked about the economics, and
Sorry.
there will be,
Yeah.
as pneumatics will be, I'm sure, a big subject of testimony later. And so
Yes, I was going to suggest, Madam Trujillo, Member Trujillo Davis, that those costs and all the pneumatic stuff are going to be very extensively covered, and so maybe that could be targeted at that time, just to not go down that rabbit hole tonight.
No, that's fair. Thank you. Yes, thank you for indulging my questions there. I don't have any more.
Thank you. Member Cates,
No questions here, thank you.
Member Bitzer,
No questions, thank you.
thank you. Member Garcia,
No questions, thank you.
thank you. And Member Honker.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Katz, did any of the questioning prompt redirect for you?
No, I think we can leave it there. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. So this panel for this topic is done, and Ms. Day, I hope you're able to get some rest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's bring Mr. Let's see, was it Mr. Heiser back on?
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer.
For a discussion of whether it would be a good time to bring on Mr. Smitherman.
We certainly can. Our position is more or less the same as what you heard from IPA, but it's after 6. I don't know if you wanted to continue or not.
Right. No, I'm not insisting. Just wondering. Then can we take a few moments, please, just to discuss the schedule for tomorrow? We don't have a lot of public comment at 9 a.m. We do have some, but not a lot. And then my memory is we can certainly go to Mr. Smitherman, and then we were going to go to, was it ozone attainment, and then the engines and turbines? Or
I believe that we have a modeling expert yet from EDF that we need to cover.
that was Thompson?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's right.
We have already done ozone attainment initiative.
Excuse me. So we were going to engines and turbines.
I think it'd be general provisions and definitions next.
Yes, definitions. Sorry, yeah. Topic 21, definitions, and then topic 22, which is general provisions, applicability. Topic 23, which is general provisions, and then 24, which is engines.
All right, so we have a little ways to go before we get to engines and turbines. I just got overly excited. All right, so is that sufficiently clear for the board members for your preparation for tomorrow? We'll hear some public comment briefly from Mr. Smitherman, from Thompson, and then going to topics 21, 22, 23, and then the big one is 24.
I do see Ms. Paranjos, and I don't know if she perhaps has a concern for her witnesses' availability.
Nope, but she's on the screen.
Nope. Just on the screen, just because you did mention Dr. Thompson earlier, but I think we're crystal clear now that she'll go after Mr. Smitherman tomorrow, so that's terrific.
All right, great, and that'll be fairly early in the morning. Well, if that's all for today, thank you all very much, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9.